Today's objective is, today we'll determine the appropriate tool to measure an object in metric units of length. Now it's your turn to repeat the objective back to me. Ready, set, go. Today we'll determine the appropriate tool to measure an object in metric units of length. Sounds great. Now it's time for us to go over our important vocabulary for today's lesson. The first word is centimeter. Can everybody say centimeter? Nice job. Now, centimeter can be abbreviated to cm period. Remember, an abbreviation is just a shortened way of writing something. Now, a centimeter is a small metric unit of length. It's about the width of your pinky finger, and we measure centimeters using a ruler. Our second vocabulary word for today is meter. Can everybody say meter? Great job. Now, meter can be abbreviated or shortened to m period. 1 meter is 100 centimeters total, and it's about the length of your arm span. We measure meters using a meter stick, which is slightly longer than a yardstick. Or we could also use a tape measure. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see an image at the top of a pinky finger. It's labeled 1 centimeter to remind you that a centimeter is about the width of your pinky finger. It's not an exact measurement, it's an estimate, meaning it's really close. Below that image, you can see our classroom ruler, so I've labeled it ruler. Now, you might have noticed, I also flipped it around from yesterday, so now the centimeters are labeled on top and the inches are at the bottom. Looking closely at that image, what do you notice, by the way, about the difference between centimeters and inches? If you observed that centimeters are about half the size of an inch, you're totally right. That means centimeters are a smaller unit than the inch. Down below, you can see an image of a silly person holding a piece of yarn with her arms wide open. That's to remind you that 1 meter is about the length of an arm span. But like the pinky measurement, it's just an estimate. It's not exact. Now, 1 meter is also about the length of 3 rulers, but plus a little extra. 1 meter is also equal to 100 centimeters. Don't forget that detail. Now, just like our lesson last week, there are some steps for you to follow to do measuring using the metric system. So, for today, you need to, 1, decide if the object should be measured in centimeters or meters, and then 2, decide which measuring tool would be most appropriate. So, a ruler, a meter stick, or a tape measure. Now, we don't only have to remember those steps, we also have to remember these rules for measuring. Now, using the metric system, for small objects we would use a ruler and we would measure in centimeters. Now, for medium and larger objects, we would use a meter stick or a tape measure, and we would measure using meters. Unlike the customary system, the metric system only has 1 unit that we would use for both medium and large objects, meters. Now it's time for me to model a couple of problems. Number 1 says, which unit and tool would be the most appropriate to use to measure the length of the classroom? Below the question, there's a spot for me to write in the unit of measurement, and there's a spot for me to write the appropriate tool. So I'm standing in the center of our classroom because for number 1, we have to measure from wall to wall to find the length of our classroom. Now, I'm standing here, and as you can see, our classroom is so big that it actually doesn't even fit into the entire shot of this camera. So, I have 2 options as far as measurements go. I can either measure using the unit centimeters, or I can measure using the unit of meters. Number 2 says, determine the most appropriate unit of measurement and tool to find the height of a glue bottle. Just like in number 1, below the question, there's a spot for me to write in the unit of measurement, so either centimeters or meters, and there's also a spot for me to write in the tool that I chose to measure the height of a glue bottle, so either a ruler, a meter stick, or a tape measure. So I'm going to go with centimeters for my unit when measuring a glue bottle. Now, for the height of a glue bottle, so from top to bottom or bottom to the top, I also need to figure out which tool I would use to measure this. Well, I have two options. So I can either use a ruler or I can use a meter stick. Now remember, I'm measuring the height. So for this direction, that would be length. So I need to flip them because I'm measuring height, so from top to bottom. Well, either way, it doesn't really matter because I can see very clearly that this meter stick is way bigger than the height of a glue bottle. And this ruler looks like the perfect size. So I'm going to go with ruler as my tool. Now it's time for you to get started with your independent practice pages. So you're going to head to Google Classroom and you'll have two options. Option 1, as usual, is to print off the worksheets and to do them by hand. Don't forget, if you choose option 1, you still have to do a presentation, so make sure to follow that Seesaw link. If you choose option 2, that means that you're going to edit the templates on Seesaw. And then in addition to following that link, you also have to follow the math presentation link. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys do with measurement today. Good luck!